Definitely an exciting evening, but we also went into Election Day with a great deal of confidence. We've worked hard. I've worked hard, certainly in my capacity as a city councilor, working with all of our city's residents across every neighborhood. And then over the course of the campaign, we've been focused on making sure that we are connected to and connecting with every one of our city's residents. So felt certainly confident going into Tuesday, Election Day, preliminary day, and feel that same confidence as we work, again, to remain connected to and build relationships with all of our city's residents across every neighborhood heading into November 2nd.
So we got some hard questions, right? We have some hard questions. So first and foremost, the number one question that everyone has is, how does she identify? I don't know why that's the number one question across the board, but it's just like, well, she identifies as a person of color, but does she? And so I can't tell you how many conversations I have had in the last 2 weeks. It's just like, but what does she identify? Like, it's good that we identify you as certain things, but what does Annissa identify as?
Well, I think it's a fascinating question that I continue to get, and appreciate the conversation to share a little bit about my story, a little bit about my history, a little bit about my heritage, and a little bit about how I identify, especially as an Arab woman in this city, as a daughter of immigrants, as a daughter of Dorchester. I'm so grateful that my parents, both with two very different immigration stories, two different life experiences, my mother being Polish Catholic, my father being an Muslim and an Arab immigrating to this country, their experiences here certainly shaped them and impacted my upbringing in my life today. So I'm very grateful for those experiences. I'm very grateful for that identity. But also I'd add those stories, those experiences have, I think, helped me better connect with the people of Boston who come from varied backgrounds, who come from different immigration stories, whether they just arrived over the last couple of weeks and are engaging in the work of the city, or they've been here for several generations and identify as either Black or Latino or Asian American or Irish American or Polish or Arab. For me, it is about connecting with all of our city's residents and making sure that in my capacity today as an at-large city councilor, I'm representing them, and as mayor of Boston, that I will represent them.
And so you speak about being the daughter of immigrants. We know that since everyone was running, one of the things that people were campaigning on was ensuring that we keep ICE out of BPS and we are not deporting young people. And so I wanted to know, being the daughter of immigrants, how do you feel about the interactions that BPS has with the Boston Police and ICE as a relationship, as well as what's taking place at our borders in Texas?
Yeah, no, I've been on the record and very vocal about my opposition to ICE being in our schools. We should not be sharing information between the Boston Public Schools and the Immigration and Customs Agency. That, to me, is an irresponsible position for our Boston Public Schools to take. And it's so important that when our young people enter our schools, enter our school buildings, are part of our school communities and in our classrooms, that they feel safe, that they feel welcome, that they feel protected. As a classroom teacher for 13 years, my priority certainly was to engage my young people, my students, my kids in their academic learning. But most important is to make sure that they feel and that they are safe. And if children, young people, and their families don't feel that that school experience is a safe one, that child will never be able to fully engage in the academics, in the learning, in what's happening in the classroom. And that, for me, is central to my mission as a teacher. Every teacher wants their kids to feel safe in their classroom and in their schools. So I'm very vocal about that. The other part of that work is, especially now as an at-large city council, especially someone who wants to lead their city, so I'm also standing up and standing for our immigrants to this country. Again, as the daughter of immigrants, and again, my parents had two very different immigration stories. My mother is Polish. My grandmother, at the age of 14, was taken from her home in Poland to work in a labor camp in Germany during World War II. My grandfather was in the Polish army, became a prisoner of war they met in a displaced persons camp, which is similar to a refugee camp, just an individual status is slightly different. That's where my mother was born. They immigrated here as displaced persons. My father came to this country in his adulthood, in his early 20s, met my mother, and convinced her that marrying him would be a great idea. And the merging of two very different cultures, two very different backgrounds, two very different religions, certainly every day, again, has informed me and has, that experience has made it very clear to me that as Americans, as an elected official, we need to stand up for those that are seeking refuge and here in the United States. And today, this moment in time, the devastation that those from Haiti have faced and their desire, their desperation and their need to come here to the United States seeking freedom, seeking political asylum is something that I, as a proud American, as a proud daughter of immigrants, will stand up and fight for every single day.
And so you mentioned, prior to talking about the border and our Haitian brothers and sisters, you mentioned safety in education. I want to take that to when it comes to this vaccine and COVID-19 and the mask mandate and we're seeing with the state police, the vaccine mandate. And so as mayor, what are we looking at as far as COVID-19 precautionary mandates and or if none?
So you cut off there right at the end. I support the vaccine mandate. I think it's really important that we are all getting vaccinated. And our city's workers, our frontline workers, need to make sure that the public is safe, especially if you work in public service.
And what about choice? As far as mandate is concerned, what about personal choice?
So we have right now, as the mandate has been articulated, Chair, there is either vaccine or testing. And we need to get as many vaccines as possible into everyone's arms. That is, the answer, and if we follow the science, vaccine is the answer to that challenge. We also understand that there could be healthcare implications, and that's when we're putting in play testing. Testing needs to be easy and accessible and frequent, and I think that right now is the mandate says that vaccine or weekly testing. I also want to talk a little bit about the mask mandate. I think it's unfortunate that we have to have a mandate in place for the mask. Adults should be more responsible. Unfortunately, we have to have this mandate in place. And as the mask mandate relates to our schools, I've received the question, as more and more vaccines roll out, will we walk away from the mask mandate in schools? I don't see an end to masks in schools this year. I think that discussion should just be ended. We know that the masks play such an important role in keeping everyone within the school community safe, and we see that rolled out. But in the end, following the science, getting the vaccine, the shots into arms, has to be the work that we're focused on. I will say we've seen a really good response from the city as a whole, but still too many of our communities of color in particular have been afraid of the vaccine. And that's around education and information, that's around accessibility, and we know that the vaccine is available in many, many places, but we need to share the information around the safety of that vaccine. We need to make sure that our city residents, it's easy for them to get the vaccine. Throughout the course of this campaign, I visited a number of vaccine sites, whether it's community-based health centers, community-based organizations, in front of public spaces and in up to our National Vaccine Day was at Washington Park, and there was a team of nurses and community members and medical professionals rolling out the vaccines to community members. It's so important that we continue to do that. And now, as we've seen the booster come online for our city's residents that are 65 plus and have some underlying conditions, health concerns, we need to make sure that that booster now is rolling out. So the vaccine is the answer, and getting as many shots in as many arms as possible every single day is going to be our goal, as well as education, because that fear is real, and that fear can be paralyzing. across, especially in our community.
And so trust, right? One of the things that we see is people do not trust the vaccine, nor do they trust the police, but the police trust you. So when we look at communities of color that have not the strongest relationship with the police department, but the police are in full support of you, what does that say? Or I'm just trying to correlate here with the police backing you and supporting you and not really supporting people of color. Does that mean, what does that mean for Boston residents that already feel like we have a system that is inequitable when it comes to the diversity, to the point that we have to force diversity on the police department? The fire department is at 73% Caucasian. That is not the makeup of what Boston is. It just, as far as the overarching problem taking place here in the city of Boston, what does that mean for Black residents that are already fearful of the police, and now this is the candidate that the police are supporting?
So first, I just want to be very clear that I don't have any formal endorsement by our police department or our police union. I have had a very thoughtful and sometimes very honest relationship and opportunity to work with them, especially over these last 6 years in my capacity as a city councilor at large. It is so important that as I do this work today as a city councilor, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks as mayor of this city, that I have both a strong relationship, of course, with our city's residents. That's central to my work every single day in this capacity as well as in the capacity as mayor. But that we're also making sure that we have an opportunity to uphold the promise of community policing, that we are strengthening and rebuilding any broken bonds between police and our neighborhoods and our city's residents, in particular our Black and brown communities. I think that reform and transparency and accountability within the Boston Police Department are central and critical to rebuilding and strengthening those relationships, in particular with our Black and brown communities that have felt, for sure, the pressure of over-policing and presence within their communities. As mayor of the city, that I am working every day to ensure our community's safety, that we are working on violence prevention in partnership with community-based organizations, with our police department, as well as with our residents, and that we are responding quickly and clearly to any accounts of injustice, any accounts of civil rights violations. We need to be focused on that. And I believe that work can happen when there are strong relationships built between our communities, in particular our communities of color, and our Boston Police Department. We've got a lot of work to do around diversity, around that greater transparency, and around public safety. And again, investing in a real way in community policing across our city, but in particular our neighborhoods that have felt the impacts of violence, that have felt the impacts of trauma, that have felt the impacts of crime in our cities. So we have to do that work. And that's why I've been able to build on some strong relationships within communities and within the Boston Police Department and across our first responder agencies.
And so really quickly, Tatiana Maxwell Jiminson said, "Hey, Mrs. George, you are one of her favorite teachers." And that's coming in from LinkedIn. That's currently not connected here, but it was a comment nonetheless. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we would fall down a rabbit hole, but what does that rebuilding community, rebuilding that trust look like when, the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, dyslexia is so real. And so what does it look like when, our boys are still being stopped? And in my experience, my son is the greenest thing from having any type of street knowledge, street cred, street anything, but is currently in the gang database. And so when I tell you he is such a good boy that when the police stopped him and frisked him, he literally cried. And so I'm trying to understand, as a parent, I was livid. I went straight for everyone's throat. But it still happens, and he still gets stopped. And now he's like, oh, that's an Ari. Like, that is unacceptable. So what does that rebuild and that retrust look like? Because for it, there's nothing they could do to rebuild and they took his innocence that day. How you rebuild that?
Well, certainly we need some significant reforms as it relates to both the game unit and the game database. We've got, this point system that is used, just too quickly puts individuals that shouldn't be in a database, who shouldn't be subject to any of that treatment in a place where they don't belong. And so we certainly have to fix that, and that's part of the reforms that are so necessary. We talk very generally about transparency, greater accountability. Those are things that we all agree on and believe in. How do we get there? We get there by making sure that we have a police department that is much more diverse and much more reflective of the city it serves, especially within these specialized units, that there is a greater reflection of the communities in which they function in across our city of Boston. We've got to celebrate that diversity, and we need to make sure that our workforce reflects that diversity. And that is for the police department, as well as the public works department, as well as the school department across the board. And then we need specific reforms around the game database, as I mentioned, and the game unit and how they do their work. I do not agree with dismantling them. I think that they have an absolute role to play in public safety. We just need to make sure that they are updated on that process is reformed and that training happens. We've got to invest in proper training and make sure that community is a part of that reform and that updating and that training. And that's really where we get back to sort of the central role that true community policing plays in our city. And 20 years ago, we were recognized as the model. Boston was recognized as the model for community policing nationally. We need an updated certificate. We need to make sure that we're making the investment in community policing, and investment is, dollars, but it's about people and training.
I'm sorry. I'm going back to the relationship. Since you have a relationship with them, can you please tell them that it's not okay and we don't like it when 4 white boys jump out of a truck in the middle of Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, Hyde Park, have no idea about the area that they canvass as far as people are concerned, and don't have any relationships. And when they're supposed to be, I don't know the technical name of it, but they sit in their truck. Like, that's not community policing when you're sitting in your truck, mean mugging people, asking them what they're looking at. And this is personal experience, and I have absolutely nothing to hide. I have no legal issues, no nothing. And this is what I experienced from my taxpaying dollar. It's just, for me, it's not a good look. One of the questions was, is it true that the police department didn't formally endorse you, but did hold a fundraiser on your behalf?
I've had a lot of support from police officers across the department. There isn't a formal, there wasn't a formal event, but I've had a lot of support from police officers here in the city of Boston. I've also had a lot of support from city workers here in the city of Boston. It's one of the, there's a number of folks that go in and do deep dives on fundraising. I have the highest percentage of individuals who live here in the city of Boston compared to the other candidates who have donated to my campaign. And that is, I think, a good thing. We've got local support, both in votes and in volunteers, but also in dollars. And it costs a lot of money to run a campaign. And when our city's residents are supporting my campaign, not just with their might and their muscles, with canvassing and door knocking and phone making, but if they're able and they're also contributing
with their dollars,
I'm grateful for that.
What does it look like for? So this is a question that I asked Michelle, and so I just want to be fair. As far as Black media is concerned, we saw with the Walsh administration that he was like, we're going to do this urban media roundtable, and it happened once and then never happened again. And I would just like to know, like, what does urban, and not just urban as in Black, but non-billboard having, mainstream media, what does that look like as far as you being mayor and us having access to the office?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question, and I haven't heard about this roundtable concept. I think that that's one that we absolutely should do. Because Boston, although we're technically a 2-newspaper town, we've got so many community newspapers that we, as a campaign, have worked to be really intentional about utilizing those newspapers in addition to the major newspapers. And the same comes for both radio and television and other sort of media platforms. We try to be as accessible as possible. There's very rarely an opportunity where I have to say no. And, I want to be present, I want to be engaged, I want to be accessible. That's my reputation, and I fully intend on maintaining that reputation as mayor of this city. Sometimes the schedule doesn't always work out exactly, but we're always working to make it happen. And, I'm really grateful for that idea. I think that's a fascinating concept and something that we should absolutely look to commit to. Before I make a commitment for a periodic roundtable, I want to make sure that that's okay with my team, and that's something we have the capacity to do. But, I think that's an incredible opportunity to make sure that we truly are connecting with and engaging with all of our city's residents. So if we think about, back to the vaccine question, so much of the fear is based on a lack of information. But if we're only relying on a few channels to communicate with our city's residents, we're going to miss hundreds and thousands of things, because not everybody wakes up and reads the morning paper or turns on sort of the quote-unquote mainstream news. I know that our city's residents engage in lots of different platforms, whether it's based on culture or language or proximity or relationship, or the topics in which are covered in a particular platform. I need to make sure as mayor that we're utilizing all of those places to reach our citizens.
So we got callers coming in, we got questions coming from all the platforms. I have to be 100% transparent and say that this is probably going to be the hardest question of my career. And it's because it's such a passion for me. And so my heart broke when the news came out that City Councilor Annissa Essaibi George had a representative from her office block or go against a development that overshadowed her husband's development. Can we please, you guys know I'm a real estate agent, so I was just like,
This shouldn't be a hard question for you. I think it's an important question for you to ask, and I've been asked it a couple of times, so I'm sorry that it shouldn't be comfortable to ask it. We've been very clear in my office over the last 6 years, that very clear line separating my work and my husband's work. And for the few times that he's been present in City Hall with business, we've never been in the room. This is a project based on an address that didn't mention or reference or refer to my husband. My husband was not on the docket. My husband was not present. He was not engaged in those conversations. My staff member followed the exact protocol we have for every project across the city. We go to community meetings and civic association meetings. We talk with neighbors and abutters. We have discussions with other local elected, and then take a position on projects. That's what we did in this case. There's no knowledge that it was an immediate budding project. And to today, I can tell you if it was to the left or the right of this project. When that was brought to our attention, I reached out to an ethics attorney, who then reached out to the State Ethics Commission on my behalf about this issue, sort of declaring it as something that we've been notified of, so that we're following the due process that we need to follow. We're waiting for a response back from the commission. They've received the documentation. They received sort of all the information that we needed to provide them through this council, and we're working through that. And I understand and appreciate, and as the mayor of the city, I have to be held to a very high standard, not just following ethics requirements and upholding those legal requirements that I have as a city employee and as mayor, as a city councilor today. But as mayor, I need to add some additional buffers. And my husband will do no new business before the city, especially when you consider he will be presenting himself before boards and commissions that I appoint. We will hire an abuzz person that if he were to pull a permit to put on a new, I was doing my front stairs over, I needed a permit book, that there would be another abuzz person that would follow that paperwork through the process. It is so important to me that I'm asking others to be clear and transparent, that I am also clear and transparent, and not creating new conflicts. And at the very least, an appearance of a conflict is a problem. So we've got sort of steps in place for when I become mayor, and we've taken the appropriate steps following that one particular case.
And so it is a difficult, because as a person, I have love and respect for you, and it just, that hit me, because I know me personally as a real estate agent, had I conducted myself in a similar manner, I wouldn't have my real estate license today. And so that though the name on the docket may have, I don't know what my, I'm just thinking like the pillow talk, that as your husband talking about like we're having pushback from community, like none of that played a role on how So how did you have to go to the ethics community?
I actually probably don't. I filed that because it was brought up in an article, and I want to make sure that I am doing everything appropriate. This was not my husband's project. It did not relate to my husband directly. It was an abutting project. My husband was not on the docket. Because it's a neighboring project, we put in the statement of the ethics commission because it was brought up by
one of the newspaper also brought. Yeah.
When my head hits the pillow at night, it goes to sleep. If there's any conversation, it's just, do the kids brush their teeth and what do we got on the schedule for tomorrow? I've got enough on my own plate to worry about his plate.
And so you stated multiple times throughout, all articles and even here today with me that there will be separation between you and your husband's businesses, between your work and his work. But at the end of the day, the finances still come together. When people talk about people being evicted, or your tenants or his tenants, I don't know how that works, tenants being evicted for less monies than he owed to the city, that was kind of like a low blow.
I feel what you're referencing.
So the article made reference to tenants that were being evicted, and tenants are evicted. Like if you don't pay your rent prior to Corona, you get evicted. Like that was real life for everybody. But there was like fees that weren't paid, violations that were rolled over. Like, will you hold your husband accountable for the properties that he does have that tenants are complaining about, that the article could even make mention of?
I hold myself to a high standard. I hold my husband to a high standard. Anyone doing business in the city should be held to a high standard. Anyone who is housing people, who is providing, whether it's units for rent or units for ownership, I hold everyone to a high standard, including my husband. I will say, I'm running for mayor. I'd like to see my record, and I'm not sure exactly what that story is that you are referencing.
Okay. No worries. We'll skip over it. And
I don't want to sort of skip over it, but I will say, just to maybe put a fine point on it, anyone doing business in the city needs to be held to a standard, a high standard of how they conduct themselves in business. And I hold myself personally to a high standard. I hold my husband to a high standard in his business. And I think that that should be the case across the board. It is a privilege to live in this city. It is an honor to live in this city. It is a privilege and an honor to lead the city and to conduct business in this city for anyone involved. And I think that everyone should be held to a high standard of when they choose to do business here in Boston.
You are an educator. You were formerly a teacher. Speaking about education, before we talk about what does education look like under your mayorship, I would like to revisit the last interview that we had together where we spoke about having an elected school board committee, and you were like, no, them people need to be appointed. Politics doesn't need to be in it. We are the only city in Massachusetts. Is in that position of, as mayor, I should appoint rather than them being elected. Does the rest of Massachusetts have it wrong?
The town should make decisions for themselves, of course. And we have an opportunity on the November 2nd ballot with a non-binding referendum question on that very subject. So there's lots of conversations, and there have been for a long time, whether this city should have an appointed or an elected board. So my experience and my hope is that we remain appointed. Now, I supported the non-binding referendum question to go on the back.
I'm sorry, what is, forgive my ignorance, what does it mean non-binding?
So it's not a true commitment. It is not, if we have a binding referendum question and the vote goes, say, in the favor of, I think we did that on question 2, for example, with the cannabis. The legalization of marijuana, that was a binding question. And so if it passed, it legalized marijuana, cannabis in Massachusetts. This is a non-binding, so it's whatever the response is not a mandate. It is simply, it becomes, I guess, more of a recommendation.
Oh, yeah, I clearly missed this part in my bachelor's of political science. So you are asking me, do I want chicken or beef? And I say I want chicken, but I'm finna give you beef. Like, I'm trying to understand, what's the point of asking me if you're gonna do what you want to do anyways?
I think that you have to ask the makers of the ordinance of the referendum question what their intention is. I think the benefit of it, as someone who's opposed to it, is it does create, I think, much more constructive conversation around this topic. There has been a lot lost in sort of the argument around elected versus appointment. I have my position and my opinion on why I think an appointed board that's appointed with a vastly improved nomination process, that is appointed with a significant partnership with the city council on some of those appointments, with, I think, a redesign on who different seats should represent. I've done the work to ensure, and we're not there yet, but I hope with my colleagues in the city council that we can get there soon, that the student member has the right to vote, because today the student member does not have the right to vote. I think that a parent should sit on the board, and technically, we do have parents that sit on the school committee, but they're not required to sit on the school committee. I think that an educator should be required to be a part of the Boston School Committee. And those are just some examples. And I think that we should also be able to identify the person we hold accountable for the success or failure of our school district. Because when you've got an elected committee without sort of one person in charge, there becomes lots of finger pointing. And, you know, this one's in charge, or that one's in charge, or the mayor won't let us do it, the mayor has no authority. I, as a teacher especially, as a BPS grad, as a parent of 4 BPS kids, I want to be held accountable for the success and the failures that our school system has. And unfortunately, we've got many failures across the district that I want to focus my time on, that I want to focus some of my sort of energy on, build certain relationships between our superintendent and our school department, our school leaders, our teachers, but our kids and our families has to be centered to those conversations. I also worry through a elected school board process, the influx of some special interests. And we've got, we see the politics that are played on the city council, we see the politics that are played in the mayor's race, and then the state rep race, the state senate race. I want to ensure that our school committee that oversees the operation of the Boston Public Schools is as free as possible. There'll always be politics in Boston education from those political influences. And I want to have that responsibility. And mayor after mayor, candidate for mayor after candidate for mayor has said, judge me on the success of our schools. Let's hire a teacher for the leadership job to lead this city. And I think we'll have some true opportunities to change the course of our Boston Public Schools, not down the road, but in the near future.
And so changing that course is keeping it in the same vein of education. Really quick question. Current Mayor Janey stated that she was not going to implore the National Guard as bus drivers. Would you have done the same thing, or you would have brought in the National Guard?
So I would have hoped as mayor, I would have been able to have a stronger relationship with the bus drivers union to ensure that our workforce showed up for work, and that we would have made sure, my administration, that they would have had the things they needed to feel safe getting to and from work every day and transporting our most precious cargo across the city. I think we failed in appropriately planning for the opening of school day. It was a national story for many, many weeks prior to the start of school that there was a national bus shortage. And in the very end, when kids are left on street corners, when kids aren't picked up at the end of their school day, when kids are left on their front stoop and parents unsure where their kids are, when their school bus might show up, or whether or not they get home safely from school, we have a problem. And we've got to think maybe more creatively about how we're getting kids to and from school. We spend a significant amount of money on school transportation. When I joined the council in 2016, that was a $90 million budget. We are this year budgeted, and we almost always go over by between $5 and $10 million. This year, school year, we are budgeted to spend $137 million. And that it is unacceptable when we invest that much money in school transportation that any kid is left on a corner, that any kid is not returned home safely from school any day of the week.
Listen, we got Uber drivers and Lyft drivers that'll take all 10% of the BPS budget. How about that? So you talk about like outside of the box creativity thinking. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole because I want to talk about education and what does education and accountability look like when we know that even our valedictorians are not doing as well as they could be doing. Our education system absolutely sucks. I have 3 of Anari's besties didn't do what they needed to do, didn't graduate, and had to return. They were previously at Edward Brook Charter and then got kicked out of there in order to do traditional. I don't know how that works. I really don't care. I just know that they said, yo, I have a 3.3 GPA. I could have never at Brook. And what I'm learning in my senior year in BPS, traditional BPS, we learned in freshman year of Edward Brook Charter School. And that hurt my heart, first of all, because education is near and dear to me, though I'm an educator in a different light. What does education, not just the structure and the buildings and the lack of diversity, but in curriculum look like for you?
No, I mean, that's a fantastic question. And certainly when we are providing our students with academic rigor, when we are providing our students with the wraparound services they need in which to engage in a rigorous curriculum, we fail our kids. I think it starts with answering the question, how are we spending each dollar of the $1.3 billion school budget that we have in Boston? How is each one of those dollars student-facing, impacting a child? How are we making sure that they are getting everything they need out of an incredibly large budget? And, it starts with our babies. It starts with making sure that we have an aligned literacy curriculum for our kindergartners, our first, second, third graders, that we're also focused on our babies before they even enter the Boston Public Schools, that we're supporting child care and early education providers so that kids are more prepared when they're entering kindergarten. I think that's sort of a wild thing for me because when I was a baby, when I was a kid, kindergarten was for play. But we know that kids need so much more support and stronger academic foundation so that they can engage in the curriculum for the long time. As we are investing appropriately in aligned literacy curriculum, especially in those early grades, a child can engage in any content matter throughout the rest of their academic career, whether that's through 12th grade and high school graduation or all the way through medical school. We can trace it all back to what we're doing for them and with them and their babies, and supporting families in that too. But for BPS, the things that need to change, high school redesign is a big deal. I am committed to making sure that we are focused on high school, but also especially focused on Madison Park Vocational Technical High School. I've committed in my first 100 days to roll out a strategic plan for Madison Park. I also think it's terribly important that we are looking at creative configuration. So as a child enters our school system, how many pinch points are there when they're re-enrolling in school? Their parents are, struggling with the assignment process, which still today is enough. We need that grade reconfiguration. We also need to take a very hard look at special education services, especially the impact of sub-separate classrooms on Black and brown boys in particular. We see a disproportionate amount of our students who are in sub-separate special ed classrooms being Black and brown boys. When we talk about the school to prison pipeline, it goes directly through those sub-separate special ed wings. And we need to really support our kids. And when we focus on early literacy, when we focus on being very intentional on that curriculum that we are using and making sure that our teachers have access to the professional development they need, we can identify early warning signs of a learning disability, especially when we think about disabilities that are related to reading and comprehension. The earlier we can identify our children, support services they need, the more success they're going to find, and the more achievement they're going to reach. And we've got to close that achievement gap. We've gotten so wide, and forget COVID, so the hole has been blown wide open. We've got a great deal of work to do, and it's about the academics and about the curriculum, and it's also about the support services. I've done the work as a member of the city council to make sure that we had a full-time nurse in every one of our school buildings. This last year, through this last budget process, I have fought to make sure that we have a mental health professional, a social worker in every licensed social worker in every one of our school buildings. So the kids return to the classroom, I want them to achieve academically. I want them to engage in their coursework and in their academics and get the 3.3 GPA and higher, but they can't do it if they're not right, if they're experiencing trauma and poverty and food insecurity, if they're dealing with the challenges of this last year and a half of isolation, of disconnection from one another, of real loss.
And what does that look like? So from what I understand, and I'm going to go through a couple questions really quickly because we're coming to the top of the hour, but from what I understand, a school nurse is at some facilities on Tuesday, Thursday, and at another facility. So you better only be hurt on Tuesday and Thursday because that's the only day that your nurse is there. And so you can't have a mental breakdown on Fridays because your clinical is at another school as well. And so that is a whole nother conversation for another day.
A full time in school is so important. And our nurses, especially our school nurses, we work for one. Many of our schools need many more than one, but we work for one because bumps and bruises happen, but also nurses are the gatekeepers and often the one that sees true trauma, true neglect, true, the impact of true poverty on a child and can open other doors for that child. And we really need to support and raise our school nurses in particular. But that's why that's why we also need to invest in the social and emotional wellness. If kids aren't well, physically and mentally, they're not going to succeed academically.
Okay. So as far as accountability, I want to talk about some of the ordinances that we have on the books and what that looks like as just yes or no, since we're so strapped for time. When it comes to, I forgot the technical word, but for instance, every site is supposed to have diversity. As we know, particularly, I have a thing out for Feeney Brothers because I'll see 7 white men looking at a hole and nobody of color, or maybe they identify as Italian, but like no diversity, and there's no accountability on the city level. And it's just like, oh, I thought we had this 35-year ordinance on the books. Whatever happened to that? So what is the actual word for that? It's not regulation. It's yes. But it's not being held.
People of color to work on Boston jobs. I'm committed to that. I think that is incredibly important when we think about, too, sort of by extension, the conversation around the wealth gap is directly related to employment opportunities. It's also related to home ownership, which is also
exactly. Next question.
And different sanctions and penalties if you are not fulfilling your commitment to the Boston Jobs Policy. Come up with a couple of different circles, and there's a number of individuals who are pretty passionate and advocating for that work. It's important.
It isn't, it's more than important when the city for years said that this is what we're going to do and it hasn't been done. And so it's hired. Like, I feel like we've been patient and waiting, and like something needs to come. And so in all fair, before we get to, let's do pathways to home ownership and what that looks like. I'm trying to be mindful of my time. BRA having too much power. How do we dismantle it? That's like a on top of each other. How a pathway to home ownership when we're looking at AMI, the area median income. For those who do not know, the reason why the affordability on certain projects is unaffordable to you is because we're still considering Newton as one of the affordability measures. And so when you're taking a look at Newton households at $175,000 median, and then you're taking a look at Boston, under 50% of Bostonians make under $35,000, you're like, well, this is not a new conversation. And for the last 10 years, oh, we're going to work on it. And I literally, in my experience, have seen nothing.
No, I mean, certainly, so a couple of questions there. One, home ownership, it has to be a part of the housing solution. When you think about gentrification and displacement, home ownership is a very specific answer to that. My focus, is on all of it. And affordability, quote unquote affordability, true affordability across the board, creating, whether it's the Boston area median income, so we are truly looking at the Boston median income, and then also looking at opportunities neighborhood by neighborhood, and how do we help our city's residents stay in the neighborhoods that they call home. It's a big part of your community building. It's often a place, if you help build it, you should have an opportunity to live in it and own it. But I'd say one of my areas of focus is on first generation home buyer. So when we think about families who have been here for many generations, who have always been renters, how do we turn them into home owners? How do we make sure that they have access to the capital, access certainly to the wealth, so job opportunities, workforce development, access to the economic opportunity here in our city, but down payment assistance? I'm committed to increasing our down payment assistance fund to $1 million. I think many of our city residents can afford the rent, as difficult as that can be to pay, but don't have access to the capital around down payment assistance. Mm-hmm. They also don't necessarily have access to the technical assistance, the education, the information to owning your own home.
I got that on lock. I got all y'all.
I know that's a big part of your work, is making homeowners
understand. Yeah, it is important. One of the things that we cannot recreate is the land, but yet we see a lot of fenced in properties that have been dormant, and you guys as the city don't pay anything on it and don't make anything on it. Yet I was just told that a owner occupied developer is like, oh my God, that's pie in the sky. It's unrealistic. But I think we have reached a point in life where what is unrealistic needs to be thoughtful and thought out and worked towards, because the status quo, we're done with the status quo. Unrealistic, like ideas can be, like, everything seems impossible until it's done. I don't know who said that quote, but everything seems impossible until it's like, oh, it's actually did. We actually did it. And so
we were able to turn things around overnight with COVID, or almost overnight, because there was all of a sudden a desperate need. We have to think outside of the box. We have to think creatively. And just actually the other day, we were talking about this home ownership and first generation home ownership, and how, how not just necessarily building a single family home, but how do we help a city resident build a multi-family home where, like you said, it's owner occupied, and you've got a tenant or two tenants, it's a two family or a three family, that's helping you pay those bills. That to me is an incredible opportunity that we, I think, have overlooked or taken maybe too slow of a roll on. We've got work to do. We have to think creatively around housing here in the city of Boston, and we have to, and I think it's across the whole spectrum. So it's first generation, first time, young single, young family, and then our older Bostonians. We think about our seniors who, in many cases, are overhoused, but have nowhere to go. And maybe it's not a rental opportunity for them. Maybe it's another home ownership opportunity for them. Also, if we can think about ways to encourage their housing to go to that next family, because we know, and I've done a hearing on this around housing diversity, we don't have enough family-sized housing in our city for families to grow. So I want you to work in the city. I want you to invest in the city. I want you to live in the city. I want you to grow your family in the city. I want your kids to go to Boston public schools. I want to be able to give you all the things that you need in order to make that happen. So high quality education, safe communities, good partnerships, community-based organizations that are doing the things that you need, whether it's for your kids, for yourself, for your parents, when you think about our older residents. And I want you to be able to buy a house here in the city.
Ashe. Really quickly, when it comes to the exam schools, one of the things that we know for certain, though there has not been $1 million study that came out proving it, that many of these young people have parents that have ownership in Boston. Are you committed to changing the way that young people register, specifically for the exam schools, so their parents have to show more than just a water bill? Because as an owner,
we have discharged 22 kids for lying about city residency and attending our exam schools, and in particular at Latin school, although we do see that happening with some of our specialized programs and some of our application schools. It's not only Latin schools, although we see a number of kids there.
I would like to, it is.
Starting to bill them for stealing seats from our city kids. It's a problem. Maybe not a massive problem, but any one kid who's not from the city of Boston who steals a seat at a high quality school, all of our schools should be high quality. But
First,
advanced school, a specialized school, a certain program, it is unacceptable. Bill them. It is almost always families of means that are stealing these seats. It's illegal, and it should be punished with significant fines.
Okay, and we know, no, exactly. And so it sounds like that's a yes. That's a yes for her as far as changing the way that people stealing seats. Now, when it comes to, we also have policies in place for jobs as well, but they ain't following those. We have a lot of policies in place that ain't being followed. So police now, I have heard with my own 2 ears that there are police officers, firefighters, and others that are supposed to have a 10-year minimum here in the city of Boston that get on board and take their ass elsewhere. How do you propose, or do you propose at all, that they get kicked off the force and make room, because you stealing services too, because you taking that money to.
Commission, we investigate, we have hearings, and we terminate.
Has any happened in the last 2 years?
No, because we've actually gone really in depth through the residency commission with confirming residency across our city. And we've done investigations, and there have been people who have left the job.
They didn't get fired, but they left. They got the opportunity to leave.
Well, I mean, sometimes you get when the additional paperwork is requested, things generally work themselves out.
I'll get a transfer, please.
Earlier this week, we had a hearing on an individual who's being investigated for residency fraud.
Mm-hmm. And so somebody hit me up and was just like, you didn't ask any mass and cast. If you guys follow anything that Annissa does, mass and cast is one of her heartbeats. And so there's no point in asking that question because we already know they.
On Tayla too, and I'm happy to come on maybe one day to talk specifically about mass and cast.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's around decentralizing services, making sure the right supports are in place. We need help in this effort from other cities and towns. 70% of the individuals who are mass and cast are not from the city of Boston. I'm committed in my first 100 days of convening a group of other city and town leaders, as well as partners in the state legislature, partners in the state government. We also need the federal government's help in this. We need a coordinated response, a more coordinated response. We need to fix the continuum of care, and we've got a great deal of work to do with people suffering in a community that has been impacted and devastated, and families who are in pain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So thank you. So I want to be fair. One of the questions that I asked Wu that I would like to extend to you was, you worked with Counselor Wu as a counselor. I forgot exactly how I framed the question for her, but it was basically like, this is a person that you worked with closely. You saw how they vote. You saw how they didn't show up. You saw how they were around community. And so is there anything that you believe or you feel that, I've watched this entire circus take place, and based on what I've seen of this circus, this is the reason why I am your choice?
The distinction I would draw is certainly my experiences, both building a business and teaching. Being an educator in this city, growing up in this city, graduating from the Boston Public Schools, raising my kids here in the city, certainly are experiences that have brought me to this point. But the other distinctions would also be about my engagement in communities across our city. And in particular, some of our communities who have felt most disenfranchised, most left behind, most unheard. I have a reputation that I'm very proud of being in the community, of being present, of being responsive and responsible to the work that needs to happen, again, across our city, but in particular our communities of color who for too long have been, I think, disenfranchised, who have been, that's sort of a big word, who have just been left out of the work and left out of the conversation. The conversation needs to sort of wrap up and the work needs to happen. I'm a big believer in that. I'm a practitioner of that. And I would say that is certainly a reputation that I have that I'm very proud of.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You heard it here. I am TaylaAndre. We have gone over by 3 minutes, so I apologize. I know somebody in the background right now, like, wrap it up. We got to go. So I would love to, again, if you can come back, let's do that. We have a whole month before it is election time. And so this is like, I am literally nerve-wracked on how this is going to go, because this will set the precedent for the next mayor as well. And so we have so much at stake and so much riding on this. And I just want to make sure that we get it right the first time, because we don't have any more time to waste.
We don't have review for a period of time. And I'm in this race. certainly to win this race, but to do the work of leading the city and leading in partnership with all of our city residents. So Tayla, I'm happy to come on over the next couple of weeks. We've got time and we can focus some of those conversations. We do an education talk, happy to do a math and gas talk, happy to do a public safety talk, you know, and I appreciate your audience and I appreciate the sort of the setup that you've created where people are a part of these conversations and engaged.
Thank you so much. We will close out, but I just want to keep on your mind that the People's Academy has reached out. Yes, and they want to know if you are committed to making sure that they get the space on Warren.
I am committed to working with them through that process. As far as I'm concerned, that space is theirs. We've got work to do to make it a reality.
I thank you. I love you. I appreciate you. SparkFMOnline, mayoral candidate Annissa Essaibi, George. I'm going to respect your daddy, okay? I hope you have an amazing day. We will have you back. And we are over time. And so anything, everything, TaylaAndre, TaylaAndre. She made mention to education about real estate. That's all on the website. I love you. I appreciate you. We'll see you tomorrow. Mwah. And we are off. Thank you. Thank you for